Bueno, estamos aquí con Mattias Kroon, como les dijo Luis Miguel antes, él es un crítico gastronómico muy reconocido. Y a partir de ahora ya hablo en inglés porque si no, no me van a entender. Bueno, Mattias is a very well-known food critic, gastronomic. You just say whatever you want. So as my colleague Luis Miguel was saying, he's a very recognized international food critic and an expert in international food. He travels around the world writing about food. He's a great knower of Spanish gastronomy. He comes to Spain all the time. He's been in all the big congresses. He is a regular at Madrid Fusión, which is probably our best known congress, food avant-garde food congress. He's also doing a number of things. He's also been in charge of a very interesting Swedish TV program on food, which he managed to select the content. And one of the episodes was a very interesting episode on the Basque Country and our sack. This was remind me the Swedish.
It's called Niklas Mat. If anyone knows, Swedish television.
I should have.
On Swedish television, national television, number 1, yes.
So if you missed it, you have to go back online.
Yes, I'm sure it's online, and it's a 1-hour program about Alsace and the Basque Country. I think about 700,000 people watched it in Sweden when it came out in September or October. A lot of people liked it.
So if you missed it, you have to go back online and check it out. He's also directing and setting up a very interesting mat festival in the south of Sweden. I wrote down the name of it, and I'm going to try to say it's Skaner Falsterbo Mat Festival.
Yes,
something like that. And so he's very proud about that as well. And so we're going to try to speak a little bit about what has happened in this past 10 years with Spain and our food, how we turned from our paella to what we have seen right now. It's been quite exciting, and it's been interesting for us to know the perception, what you have seen and how you have seen it evolve. What has happened from your experience?
Well, I think we all saw some fantastic proof of what's happened in Spain in the last 10 years. I think the first film was made in 2008, and I think most of the chefs I've met them or been to their restaurants to eat, and they look much younger today because they work so hard. So, but it's been a tremendous. It's like a revolution, you know. Before the year 2000, I think people, of course, all over the world knew about Spain and some classic dishes and so on. But after the year 2000, people really associated Spain with food and gastronomy of the highest form. I think Spain has always been in the shadow of perhaps France and perhaps Italy, a little bit further away. But in the last 10 years, there's now 3 countries around the Mediterranean that are world famous for their high-end gastronomy. And the reasons for that is, of course, Ferran Adrià from El Bulli, you know. He's been very well known all across the world, but it's not only him. It's not just one person who has created Spanish gastronomy. It's a whole collection of people.
We were saying it was interesting. We had a little conversation before, obviously, to prepare, and it's very interesting. You were saying how, and I agree with you, how what has happened has to do with the way they have worked together, and how it was not just Ferran, who obviously is a genius, and just like Gorka. They have amazing new ideas and have developed them. But part of what has happened has to do with the fact that they collaborated and that things were no longer a secret. Things came out of the kitchen. What's your perception of that?
Yes, totally. Because in France, for example, which is a country I love, I'm not saying anything negative about France necessarily, but it's a totally different attitude, and has always been that the chef is the chef, and he doesn't really like other chefs. And he wants to be on his own in his kitchen, and he would never really go to another restaurant where someone else is doing something fantastic, even if it's around the corner. In Paris, for example. Whereas in Spain, I always get the impression that the chefs and the restaurants, they always recommend each other. You know, they say, I can always ask a Spanish chef, a famous Spanish chef, where should I go and eat tomorrow night, and they will recommend me 5 restaurants. That would never really happen in France. They would say, no, there is nothing here. Nothing here to see, go to the hotel. And in Spain, it's the opposite, they would all work together, and you always see them together, they travel together, they experience new techniques together. Okay, sure, they all want to retain their own identity and their own special little secrets, but to 90% they would still work together and be supportive of each other, and that makes... So if you take, say, 10 restaurants or 10 chefs who all collaborate and stay together, that makes it feels like it's 100 restaurants, not 10. Whereas in other countries, people try to kind of be more competitive and want to stay away from each other. And I think that spirit, no matter what the techniques are, we can look at pictures, we can look at things, and all these things, they come and go, and they go in trends, and they disappear from the plates, and they turn up again. That will all change, but the spirit of the Spanish culture, the spirit of the Spanish gastronomy, is very inspirational for a lot of other regions, for a lot of other countries. And I think slowly but surely even the French are beginning to understand that maybe we should try to collaborate a little bit and not just compete with each other.
That's very interesting. This reminded me that when I came here a few months ago, a colleague of yours from Sweden, she was asking me, how do you express Spain's food culture in one word or in 2 words? And I had a huge trouble. I had a lot of trouble trying to come up with a word. And it just gave me an idea. I think it has to do with sharing. I think that is just like the tapas concept is about sharing. What happened here maybe had a lot to do with the fact that they shared among themselves, and that made it grow. That the idea that one had plus the idea that somebody else had, and 10 ideas became 100 dishes, and 100 plus 100 times 100 of things that other people did, and that spread over, and that have spread over, I think, very much outside of Spain, obviously. So it just reminded me that it all has to do with, at the end, with sharing, and it's only with sharing that creativity really expands. So something else I wanted to ask you, well, you answered me a little bit, why is it different? But it'd be interesting for us also to know, from your perspective, from an external perspective from Spain, and how do you think this has influenced, and how do other countries perceive this revolution, and how has it influenced or has it not influenced them?
Well, if you talk to the Spanish chefs and the Spanish gastronomy, they wouldn't probably say sharing, they would probably say innovation and creativity and technical advancements. And I think that's how a lot of people really perceive the Spanish gastronomy, as something extremely aesthetic, something really flavorful, but very new, very kind of scientific and sci-fi, futuristic even. I think we talk in those terms of poetic meanings of the Spanish high-end gastronomy. The sharing aspect is something that just happened. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something people tried to promote. But I think, right, something happened also in Spain a couple of years ago. The economy really, if I can talk about that sensitive subject, the economy really, something happened to the economy. It happened worldwide, but it struck Spain quite dramatically. And it also changed the gastronomy a lot. Because suddenly a lot of restaurants had to close. Some, not necessarily the ones we see here, but some other ones had to close down. And instead, what happened was that people started, instead of going to the high-end gastronomic restaurants, they wanted to focus on going for tapas or simple food. And that's wonderful. And the good thing about it was that for so many years there's been so much knowledge about cooking, and that's been expanding in Spain. So a lot of these famous chefs, they said, okay, I'm going to be proud and I'm going to open up a simple tapas restaurant, but with good quality product and high-end cuisine, but for a fraction of the price. So suddenly a new revolution happened, and it was a new tapas revolution and a new sharing culture that came out of this horrible downturn in the economy. And I find that extremely fascinating, how Spain managed to metamorphose into a new world one more time, although it was for negative reasons initially.
Yeah. Hopefully we got something out of that. We'll see if something else comes out. I'd like also to ask you, from your perspective, and to your fellow Swedes, what do you find is most interesting about, not just about Spain's food, but about Spain's food culture, that is probably different to what happens elsewhere, and that you find specifically interesting? And most of it you've already mentioned, but...
What's most interesting, I mean, there's a lot of aspects, I think, but I think that there are still so many things to discover, because for so many years a lot of food-interested people, food tourists and food journalists traveled to Spain to discover these places. But it mainly went on in Barcelona and perhaps in Madrid, and especially the Basque Country. But I find that now people have got their eyes open towards Spain, so people are more inclined to travel to perhaps Cadiz and Sevilla and Gran Canaria, maybe, yes, and other places to discover what's behind all these wonderful, big, famous restaurants, what's in every person's life, you know. And there's still a lot of things to discover everywhere in the food culture, in the traditional food culture. So I think if the technical creative revolution didn't happen, people would never come to discover the traditional culture.
I think most of the chefs, they've raised to a level where their technique is almost, it can't go beyond. And if it goes beyond, it's not food anymore. So there's obviously a little shift in focus towards something else. So we've done technique, we've finished with that. Well, not finished, you can always go further, but we've done that. We have everything we need to create a million different alphabets to make new dishes and to create experiences around food, and possibly the shift is moving towards nature and towards territory and towards recovering what is yours and reclaiming what you have and making something extraordinary out of your, as Carmen was saying, out of your forgotten flowers from the backyard. So that's been also really interesting in Spain. It's obviously happening in the rest of the world, but how we have come back a little bit to look inside. We spent a lot of time in creating techniques and working with scientists, and I think now you saw it in my discussion with Roca and how he's working with his biologists to find all the little plants that grow around his area. So it's very interesting to see how the revolution is maybe ongoing. It's just taking a different shift.
Yeah, I mean, I would also think that people associate Spanish gastronomy with techniques, with scientific methods and so on. And since there's been a shift, I think that's also a little bit thanks to Noma in Copenhagen. There has been a new interest in natural cuisine and looking for nature, looking for things in nature, as you said. So that revolution has not really been spearheaded or invented by Spain, I must say. However, I've been traveling as much as I can in South America, and I find a really strong interest, a really strong bond with Spain in the gastronomic circles around South America. And there, of course, nature is very important, and I think the so-called next generation of Spanish chefs will be found in South America, and they will export their food culture via Spain towards the whole world.
Interesting. We'll keep our eyes open to see what happens there. We're not going to go very long because we want to do the raffle, and we want you guys to have some food as well, and we're going to present you the food afterwards. But just maybe to finish off, I'd like you to recommend, we've been talking about this a little bit, what to do to discover Spain's food. It's not, sometimes it's not as immediate as you may think. And Mattias has obviously been to Spain many, many times, and he knows all the secrets. Well, I'd like you to share with the public, with our public today, what should they do? How should they attack it?
Yeah, well, it depends if you've been to Spain a lot or if you've never been to Spain. I mean, I have a very, very soft spot for the Basque Country, I must say that. I think the Basque Country is an amazing place. A lot of people know about it, but I could live there easily if I could. I still think the Basque Country and San Sebastian and those places and Getaria and all the places around there you don't need a guide, you don't need a book, you don't need to look up on an app. Just take a little hotel and just walk on the streets and eat what you find, because there will be something every 5 meters to choose from. It's not a hidden place, it's not a place that nobody knows about necessarily. A lot of people know about the Basque Country, but every time I go, and I've been there 10, 12 times or something, and I always discover new things in the Basque Country.
So, about, my question was more about the attitude of how we were talking before, how you were saying, how maybe it's just best to lose yourself and to not have a plan and just go to a region you've never been to. Just look on the map and just put your finger on it and go there. So we'd like to engage the public a little bit. If you have any questions that you'd like to discuss, or you have any comments about the films.
Can I ask, how many people here are from Spain?
I'm from
Very, very good.
We can still ask questions.
Yes, of course. You wanted to say something?
Yes, anyone of you used to have the roca? Go there restaurants?
Yes, a couple of times, yes.
How is the food? Does it taste as it looks like? Or?
No, it doesn't taste what it looks like. It tastes, wow. Okay, so there's a lot of dishes, there's a lot of things to experience in El Salvador Can Roca, definitely, and I can recommend anyone to go there, of course.
How about the price?
No, the price.
Okay, that's a very, very interesting aspect. That's a very interesting aspect. Of course it's expensive. It is expensive, but in the so-called gastronomic community around the world, food travelers and food journalists, chefs, everybody probably can agree that the cheapest country to eat fantastic food is probably Spain, if you compare the price and the quality. So yes, you will pay a lot, but you will pay for an amazing experience. I can go into detail about every dish that I ate if you want, but it's going to take a long time. But I would still say that Spain is very worthwhile. You can go to 3 Michelin star restaurants and you can have a fantastic lunch, 7 courses maybe, and that's going to cost you €45. You won't even get a hamburger in Sweden for that. I mean, if you live in, for example, London or New York or somewhere, and you want to take a weekend and eat a lot of great food, if you want to go to Stockholm and eat great food, you'll have to go to some extreme luxury restaurants, which will cost a lot more. And if you take that weekend, if you instead decide to go to El Salvador Can Roca and spend a couple of days in Barcelona and eat some of the best food in the world, you will spend half as much money as you would in Stockholm.
Plus we have the low-cost flights now.
Yes, it is expensive in Sweden, and the problem with Sweden, I think, is that yes, you can find a few amazing restaurants that will cost you an arm and a leg to eat in. But in Spain, you can eat great food everywhere. It doesn't have to be El Salvador Can Roca, for example. You can still eat amazing food in some incredible, simple places.
It's not so easy to say. I'm going to Spain for 15 days. I will try to go to the Salvador Can Roca in Girona.
Yeah.
It's impossible because if you have to wait a year to get a table there.
Yes. Yes, that's true. I can't do anything about it, I'm sorry. Popular restaurant.
In the bull, it was the same thing.
It was the same thing, yeah.
You have to wait almost a year to get a table.
Yes, I know. I think that's a little bit of a problem with El Salvador Can Roca. There are some restaurants which are really popular, especially El Salvador Can Roca, for a few reasons, but if I were to make a comparison with the restaurant Noma in Copenhagen, I'm not going to compare the food or anything, but in Noma, for example, anyone in here could actually get a table, because they have a booking for 3 months. So if you really want to eat in the next 3 months, you've got to keep track on which date you can book the restaurant. You can call up or send an email, and you have a chance to eat within 3 months. So you cannot book in October 2015. It's impossible. You can only book for the next 3 months, and then after those 3 months, you can have a new chance for 1 day or something. But if you really, really, really want to eat there, if that's a passion for you, it's comparable to any other passion, any other deep passion. It's like a memory for life, you know. It's worth spending a little bit of time and investing a little bit of money into that, I think.
We have a question here.
It's just a comment to the last person that was asking. I heard the other day an interview to Joan Roca in the Catalan radio, and it's not 1 year waiting list. It's they open 11 months ahead. So if you want to book now, we are in March, so you can book now for April 2015. Sorry, for February, because they open now for the month before.
Okay, so they've changed it a little bit, I guess.
It's strict.
In any, yeah. How many in here has eaten an ensalada con roca? Oh, 1 person there. Great. Dude, nice.
Maybe you can share the experience with us as well.
But it's not the only restaurant that's. I mean, I must be really honest about ensalada con roca, saying I think it's an amazing restaurant. But there are some other amazing restaurants in Spain as well. It's not the only one, and that's the one you have to eat in. And unless you've eaten in there, it's not what. I think it's fair to say that there's a whole lot of amazing restaurants in Spain. Ensalada con roca is not only fantastic food; it also has a great spirit in there. Once you eat in there, you are taking care of the service and the wines, and the whole experience from when you enter the door to when you leave is quite unusual in the world. But I think there's a lot of other. I think you should support the other restaurants in Spain that don't get 1 million people every year who try to book in there. You know, there's amazing restaurants everywhere in Spain. Try to support them.
Right, let's spread ourselves into the rest. We have a lot of 3-star restaurants. We have many 2-star restaurants. We have 144 1-star restaurants. There aren't so many countries in the world that we can say that. So you can basically be anywhere in Spain, in the middle of Spain, in a region maybe you never heard of before, and you will have a 1-star restaurant within 100 kilometers.
There is one restaurant, if anyone would be interested, I don't know, that I would really, really, really recommend to go in. It's my favorite restaurant in Spain. It's not ensalada con roca. It's a small restaurant up in the mountains in the Basque country between Bilbao and San Sebastian, in a little village called Achpe. And there's a restaurant called Etxebarri. Has anyone heard of Etxebarri? Etxebarri. And that is my favorite restaurant in Spain. It's completely different. Totally different from all the others. It's basically a collection of products of the best lobster, the best foie gras, the best oyster, and so on, cooked very, very lightly on grills. I think he has 8 different handmade asados with different kinds of wood. And it's an extremely complicated but very artisanal, very simple, very pure, and super elegant. And it's not impossible to get a table in there at all. It's difficult to go there, but it's. I think about that restaurant every day. Every day I think about the food from that restaurant.
It's very busy thinking about food. Okay, well, we're going to stop it here. You probably have more questions, but we'll be having a little bit of wine.